Okay, so here I am in CodePen. If we have a look just at the window that's in front of us right now, there's a few things that we want to take notice of. So we have a HTML box here, and in here we can put our HTML code. In the middle we have a CSS box, and that's where we put all of our CSS, our styles. And over here we have JavaScript or JS, and this unsurprisingly is where we put our JavaScript. Also down here at the bottom we have what's called the output window, and this is where all of our HTML and CSS will be outputted. There's one other thing that we'll come to later when we start looking at JavaScript, and that is the console down here, and we can just kind of print text and things to this console. Don't worry about that too much now. We will be doing that when we troubleshoot our JavaScript later. So I'm just clicking the X in the top right of the console there to get rid of that. Okay, so looking at the brief that we were given, we need a title of our Mamma Mia's Pizza shop. We need a sort of a subheading of our Always Fresh, our tagline. Then we also need a button, and we need phone number and stuff like that. So first of all, let's just talk about the HTML. So normally, right, I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger so it's easier for you guys to see, but feel free to leave your HTML window as small as it was as default. So there is some kind of boilerplate code that's going on in the background. And the way that we can see this is if we just type an exclamation point or exclamation mark or bang if you're using US English, you'll see that it comes up with this little window here. So if I just now hit tab, you'll see that we're given this kind of boilerplate code for our HTML document. And this has doctype HTML. This just tells the browser that we're using HTML version 5, the latest version. It's got our HTML opening tags, it's got our head tags with some data and some meta tags that the browser will use, and then it's also got our body tags here. You will notice though that CodePen has very helpfully just given us a little warning here, so let's go ahead and click on that. Okay, so just HTML that goes in the body goes here. Now that's because CodePen is being really helpful to us, and it's gone and done all of this stuff in the background for us anyway. So we actually don't need any of this HTML when we're working in CodePen. If we were working in our own text editor, or we were creating a website completely from scratch without any of CodePen's help, then we would need to put this in. But for now, let's just go ahead and delete that. Don't worry about the 13 unsaved changes here. If you want to save your code as you go along, just go ahead and click the save button up here. Okay, so first things first, thinking back to our brief, what we needed was a heading of Mamma Mia's Pizza. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a H1 tag here. Let's get rid of this warning. A H1 tag, and then in it I'm going to put Mamma Mia's, double M, sorry, Mia's Pizza. Fantastic. Now you'll notice that nothing has happened, or we've got some issues here in our output window. Well, that's because we need to close off our tag. So we do that with the /, use the same tag, so the H1 here, and close that off. Excellent, we now have our heading. Now let's just take a moment to have a look at these tags. So they all start with an angle bracket, the name of the tag that we're using, and then we close off with an angle bracket. We kind of use the less than and the greater than symbols to do so. Inside, we put whatever is in that tag. We kind of create that element's inner text, or the inner HTML for that element, and then we close off the H1, or we close off the tag using a / here. Not all tags require a closing tag, but for the most part they do. Great, so we've got our heading there. Let's have a look at our subheading. So let's open up another tag, and we're going to call this H2. So this is a slightly less important heading. Use my angle bracket to create that first H2 opening tag. And then we'll use our tagline. We'll say, always fresh pizza. Now you'll see that the output window is updating, and it's kind of trying to, it says, well, I understand that this is a H2, but we could run into problems later on if we don't close our tags properly. So let's go ahead and angle bracket / H2. Excellent. Now we've got our title and our subtitle. So there's a couple of things that we kind of need to do here in our HTML. When we think back to our brief, we needed a button that would show the phone number when it was clicked. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to use angle bracket, and we'll use an element button. So now we have our button. You can see just down here we've kind of got this button that says nothing, does nothing. It's a little bit useless at the moment. And inside this button, I'm going to say see phone number. So now we've got that text. Again, even though this works, because the browser realizes, well, we've opened a button tag and we have see phone number here. If we don't close it off properly, say I go on to the next line here and say I want to put callers. You see, it now actually puts that text inside the button, even though that's not what we wanted. So it's really important to make sure that we're closing off our elements properly. So let's just get rid of that. Open an angle bracket, and I'm going to say close or / button, and then angle bracket. Now you see, if we say callers underneath, it appears outside of the button. Excellent work. Okay, so that's pretty much our HTML sorted. That was nice and easy. That was nice and quick. There is just one thing that I'm going to put in ready for when we when we add the functionality to the C phone number. I'm just going to put an empty P tag. So I'm going to say P and then close the P tag, just like that. Now you'll notice that nothing has appeared here because even though that P tag exists, there's no content inside it. So it looks to us like there's just nothing there. But it's this P tag where we're going to actually insert that phone number. Okay, so let's now move on to some CSS. So one of the things that we saw from the initial brief that the designers have put together is that we needed things aligned centrally rather than always here, which is the default of the browser, it being on the left. We needed to change some colors. And we also needed a bolder font as well as a different font for our text. So let's go ahead and select everything that's within our body. Do you remember before when we were given that, when we did that boilerplate code, we were given a warning that said only things within the body need to go here? Well, what we can do is we can, in our CSS, we can grab that body tag. Now you'll see that I need to write body. I've added a space. I'm opening a curly bracket, and CodePen is being very helpful in closing that curly bracket for me. I'm just going to hit enter or return, and you'll see that CodePen's nicely formatting this for me, so I've got a nice indent and that closing bracket's now on the line underneath. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say I want everything to be aligned centrally. So we can use something called text-align. We need to add a colon, so that's the 2 dots, afterwards. So now we've got our property, and we're now going to say what that property should be. So we're going to say text-align center. Fantastic, we've got everything that's within the body of our HTML document is now aligned centrally. So if this was the only thing that we were doing in the body, we could just leave it as it is. But with CSS, if we want to add multiple properties and do multiple things to the body, remember it's cascading, it cascades down, we need to add a semicolon. So this is the dot with the comma. Great, so we've text aligned it center. Now what we want to do is we want to change the font of our text. So if I just hit return here, we can now use a property called font family. Again, I'm adding a colon after it. And in here we can add which font we actually want. But there's something that we have to think about here, is what if the user's browser doesn't actually have access to the font that we're after? So our ideal font would be, in this instance, Arial. And you'll see that we do have this font, or I do have this font. You may see it differently. That this font has now actually changed to Arial. Well, let's go ahead and add what's called a fallback font. And we do this by adding a comma afterwards. And I'm going to say, hey, if they don't have Arial, instead use Helvetica. Excellent. So if the user doesn't have Arial available to them, they will then use Helvetica. Now it's really good practice to then add a third fallback font that the user is guaranteed to have. So what we'll do here is we'll add the words sans dash serif. Now all this is, so serif fonts are things like Times New Roman and kind of the old style fonts that have those little ticks on the ends of letters. But we want quite a modern font that does not have those serifs, and these are just called sans serif fonts. So what we're doing here is we're saying, hey, go ahead and use Arial, but if the user doesn't have Arial, instead use Helvetica. And then if you still don't have either of those, just go ahead and use whichever sans serif font you have available to you, so that it looks about right. Great, so we've ended that. We will end that with a semicolon. Okay, so think back to our brief. We needed to use a brand color for the title. So what we can do is we can go ahead and grab all of the H1s on our page. So we say here H1, I'm adding a space and then opening a curly bracket or a curly brace, hitting enter or return, and now we can write our properties. here. So I'm going to say color, colon, and then we're going to use what's called a hex code. Now, for me on a Mac, I just need to use Option and 3. I think on a Windows keyboard, it's somewhere over on the right-hand side of your keyboard. And all this is we're going to use hexadecimal characters to say how much red, how much green, and how much blue there is in this color. Don't worry if that doesn't make too much sense, but basically the brand color that we've got from the client is F00D1E. So now if we wait for this to update, we can see that we now have that nice muted red font color here. Wonderful. So what we've done there is we've gone and targeted all of the H1 elements on our page. Let's just test that this is the case. It's not just seeing the first one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to my HTML here. And I'm just going to add another H1 that says hello, and then close that H1 like so. Great. We can see that even though there's multiple H1 tags, this is being applied to each of them. Wonderful. Right, I'm just going to remove that because we don't need it. And then I think the only other thing that was in our brief is we needed to make the subtitle bold. So let's go ahead and grab our H2s, add a curly brace afterwards, and then we're going to use a property called font-weight. We need we need a colon, and then we're going to say the font weight is bold. Cool, and we have bold H2 there now. Fantastic. Let's now, I think that looks correct. I think that looks as the brief says it should. Let's now move on to our JavaScript and actually making this interactive, because if we just click this button here, you see nothing happens. No phone number actually appears. So what we'll do is, inside our JavaScript box here, what we need to do is we need to get this button, we need to get this P tag here, and then we need to say, hey, when this button's clicked, fill the P tag with the phone number. So the way that we grab these elements in JavaScript is we need to give these IDs. So we use the ID attribute. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my cursor inside this opening button tag here. And you'll see that I'm inside this angle bracket here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an attribute of ID. We need to use an equal sign here to say that the ID equals. And this is a string, so we need to give it quotes. So I'm using double quotes here. Single quotes will work, but I'm going to use double quotes in my HTML. So we'll say that the ID equals phone BTN. And you see, this is a special casing. It's called camel case, and because it looks a little bit like humps on a camel. And this is just a way of us splitting up the words in our ID that we'll later be able to get in our JavaScript. Okay, so this button now has an ID of phone button. We also need to give our JavaScript a way of getting our P tag as well. So again, I will give this inside the opening P tag an ID of, and then don't forget the double quotes, phone num. Brilliant. You'll see that nothing's actually changed on here because even though we've given it an ID, this is only used by the browser and used by JavaScript. It's not actually visual information that we're giving to the user. Okay then, let's go ahead and write some JavaScript to make this phone number appear. So the first thing that we're going to need is to write a function. So the way that we do this is we use the keyword function, we add a space, and then we need to give this function a name. Now we could call this function anything. We could call it Dave if we wanted to, you know. But the best thing to do is to call it the thing that it does. And functions generally, they are called verbs. We use verbs. So in this instance, I'm going to call it show number, because that's what we're doing. We're showing the number when this function runs. For this function to work, we need to add some parentheses or some brackets afterwards. And then outside of these brackets, you'll see that I'm going outside of them. I'm adding some curly brackets. And inside these curly brackets, we're now going to actually have our code block. So if I just hit return, we'll get it nicely formatted. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab this phone num ID. So we'll say phone num, and be very careful of your casing and your spelling here. They have to be absolutely identical. If you type this, JavaScript will say, nope, I've never seen that before. I don't know what you're on about. So let's go ahead and get phone num, and then we're going to say dot inner text, because we want to change the inner text of this. And we will say the phone num.inner text equals our phone number. Now this data is a string, so you'll see that I've added some single quotes here. We could again use double quotes, but I like to use double quotes in my HTML, single quotes in my JavaScript. So in here we need to type the phone number, so we'll say 020 123 456. Excellent. Now you'll see that still nothing happens here when we click the C phone number, and that's because this function is not being run at all. So what we need to do is, down here just below our show number function, is we need to go ahead and grab our button and say, hey, when it's clicked, run this function. So what we'll say is, we'll say phone btn, again, be very careful of your casing and spelling here. And then we need to say, hey, listen for events on this button. Listen for when it's clicked. So we're going to say phone button dot add event listener. Add event listener. Again, be very careful of your typing here. You need to make sure that you have capital E and capital L in this add event listener. We'll add some brackets or parentheses afterwards, and then this method here, this function if you like, takes two arguments. The first one is what event do you want to listen for? So we'll add a string, so again single quotes, and we'll say listen for a click, C-L-I-C-K. Again, be very careful of your spelling there. I'm just going to press my right arrow to come outside of that string, but still inside of those parentheses, and add a comma, because this is now saying, right, our first argument is click, our second argument will be what function do we want to run when a click happens. Okay, so we want to say run this show number function. So in here we'll type show number. Okay, let's see if this works. If I click that, fantastic. We get the number showing up down here. So let's just double kind of check what we've done there. We've said, hey, HTML, create a button with the ID phone button. And then we've gone into our JavaScript and we've said, hey, grab that phone button element and then listen for a click and run the show number function. The show number function then goes ahead and grabs this p tag here with the phone num ID and changes its inner text to this string here. Fantastic. I think that's our website complete.